Hello everybody, welcome to the podcast of Peculiar Ventures. This week we're going to be discussing the topic of platformers, like a history of them and also how we think that they've evolved over time, and some platformers that we just really like.
Yeah.
So today's episode is just going to be myself, Shane, and my co-host Ali, just shooting the shit.
Hello everyone. And yourself, Shane, and me. The three of us.
Yes, yes, me and Shane and me. Everybody dance around happily. Except for me.
That's a nice rhyme.
Because I'm forever alone.
No,
you're not alone.
No.
Right. Alright, so, I can start with the first game that I ever played. The first video game I ever played was actually Kirby's Dream Land 2.
Interesting. That was the, was that still on the Game Boy or was that on the Super Nintendo?
It was on the Game Boy. Yeah, I was at a babysitter's house, and they had that on a Game Boy, and I was just like, I played it, and I was immediately like, oh, this is really cool. And then later on, the first video games I ever owned were a Game Boy Pocket with Pokemon.
Oh, a Pocket, not even like a normal Game Boy or a color.
No, it was a Game Boy Pocket, and it was with yellow version and blue version. My brother had red version. I think we shared yellow. Don't remember. I just played through that game a million times. But yeah, so that was the first game I ever owned, but the first one I ever played was Kirby. And Kirby is like one of the easiest platformers you can get?
Yeah. Kirby typically tries to be incredibly accessible from a difficulty perspective. And
Yeah, because it's like, unlike most platformers where you're limited to one or two jumps, Kirby, floats through the areas, so you don't even really have to touch the ground that much if you don't want to.
No.
And most of the enemies are defeated universally in the same way. You just suck them up and spit them out, or you suck them up and use the power, and then...
Did 2 have a power system?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. The first Kirby game I ever played, and one of the earliest games I played, was Kirby Dream Land, the original Kirby game, and that one is unique because you don't have a power system.
Oh, okay.
The way that you interact with enemies is you suck them up, and then you shoot them out as the stars,
Yeah.
which is still a method that exists in current Kirby games. Usually it's not really done because you just use the powers instead, but I like it because it just gives me all this nostalgia for the first one.
Mentally, I have a picture that I know that Dreamland 2 had it where you rode the hamster at one point.
Oh, that's the one with Rick.
Yeah. So that's really most of my memory from that. I think it had the power system, but I could be entirely wrong. I've played enough Kirby games in my life to meld them together.
Yeah, I've missed that area, like from the Dreamland 2 and 3 and like Superstar. That era of Kirby is like the main part of it that's missing from my experience with Kirby, which I need to change, but...
Yeah, and I haven't played a Kirby game probably since Superstar Ultra, I think.
I got the Switch one, Star Allies, which was fun.
Gotcha. I know there was the mech one where you could get like in a...
Planet Robobot?
Yeah, Planet Robobot. I never played... So I played Tilt and Tumble, but I never played Epic Yarn.
Oh, Epic Yarn's good.
I was told
it's a
it
lot
was a good
different
game.
Because it's not... I mean, it's definitely Kirby flavored wise, but it's not have key Kirby mechanics like sucking and power obtaining.
Yeah, it's a Kirby universe game, but it's not really like a traditional Kirby game.
Yeah.
So, what are we gonna go back to the beginning? We're gonna go back to like the origin of platformers.
You started with your first one. I'm trying to think of what my actual first platformer I played, and if that's different from the first game I played. I think my first game I played was. Definitely first I owned was Crystal, but the one I played a lot was my cousin had an N64, and Donkey Kong 64 was the game we played the most on, and I think that's my first platformer experience. I think that's slightly before I got a Game Boy and got Super Mario Bros. Deluxe for it, which was the remake of the very first. I mean, I say remake, but it was almost a straight port of Mario 1 from the NES. And it also was the first time... No, I guess not the first time, because All-Stars was out by then, but I guess to young me, that was the only thing I owned that included the Lost Levels, the Japan-only sequel to Mario 1. That's a lot harder than our Super Mario 2 was. And it also had a really cool multiplayer mode of... well, it had multiplayer in general, where you were both playing at the same time with a link cable, racing through levels. I think they were like slightly different levels, because I think they were like half of a Mario level, but they looped infinitely, and you had some kind of condition you needed to... Oh no, that's the race mode that they used for the Boo races, which was a really cool piece of content that they had where you would race against a Boo, and every time you beat it, the Boo got like darker, and like Black Boo was really fast and really hard to beat. I think so. Yeah, Mario 1 is basically my first 2D platformer that I definitely played, and then Donkey Kong 64 is the oldest 3D platformer I remember playing.
Okay, yeah. If we're talking about 3D platformer, I think the first 3D platformer I played, if it wasn't Super Mario 64, because I played that probably at my cousin's house, it probably would have been Bomberman Hero, because that was like the first 3D platformer I ever owned, I think. I think I owned that before I owned a Donkey Kong 64, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Oh, as far as first 3D platform I remember owning, when I got a GameCube, the only game I had for a long time on it was Sonic Adventure DX. And a lot of the first platformer experiences I remember playing actually... Yeah, so I guess this must be before Donkey Kong 64, because my cousin had a Sega Genesis, and we played Sonic 1 on it. And a bunch of other Genesis platformers that I think it was called Toki, where you played as like a gorilla that like spat. I think because it was called Toki Toki Boom, I think, or something.
Sounds about right. I mean, I remember playing Earthworm Jim and Booger Man, I think is the name of it, where you flick boogers at people.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, and then Sonic, because like these were all like Sega games that were super foreign to me as a kid because I owned an N64, but whenever I would go to my cousins for a holiday, I would just try to like go to their basement to play their Sega because I was like, that was just such a mystical, weird thing to me.
Yeah.
Because I'd only played Nintendo games at the time. So, I mean, I don't know, what is the first ever platformer game? Do you know if that...
I think it's hard to exactly define that because platforming was kind of like... The platformer was easy to make because it was sort of a simple game to conceptually like...
Yeah.
Get your head around because when a player presses a button, you elevate the character this many times, and so the natural challenge then is to like don't fall off or something.
Well, so instead of talking about like what we think the first ever one is, we can talk about one of the things I think has evolved massively over time with platformers, and I think that's difficulty. Especially because when you start off in the arcades, obviously the best way to get people to keep playing your game is to make it really difficult.
Yeah.
Because then people keep dying and then you keep shoving in quarters to keep on going. So like games like Ghosts and Goblins, even Jumpman, can be like perceived as all like very difficult because if you aren't like you're super precise with stuff and you die in one hit. So it's you make a mistake, you're dead. And so you have to keep shoveling money in to kind of like make up for your mistakes.
Absolutely. And even when games weren't exactly developed for arcades like Super Mario Bros, which wasn't never had like a one-player release in arcades, it was still very much defined by that sort of game design philosophy, which is why the game's like very difficult and it caps you on lives, so you have to like when the game ends you start back over.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things.
Yeah, something that we see more along the lines now in like bullet hell stuff, like Binding of Isaac, Enter the Gungeon, like kind of like Metroidvania run games. Where it's all about like
roguelikes,
roguelikes where you have not Metroidvanias, roguelikes.
Yeah.
Where you start the game over whenever you completely fail, and it's become popular in certain ways because obviously there's like a really huge sense of accomplishment when you really achieve something big on a run. Yeah. Because if you fuck up enough times, it's done and you're over, and that's why like stuff like permadeath in games is also attractive to people because it's kind of one of those things where if they're punished for their mistakes, then they feel better about their accomplishments.
Yeah.
So I mean, it makes sense that as time has gone by and as like consoles have become more relevant and, home gaming is a big, pretty much the shift that everybody has now. They're going to make things more accessible because they want more people to play it. Because if something's frustrating, but you don't have to give them money to keep doing it, they could just be frustrated and not buy your next game.
Yeah.
So,
which was the fear when they released Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels in Japan it was just Super Mario Bros. 2, and they literally feared it would be too hard for American audiences, so they never brought it over on the NES, and instead they famously rehashed another game, Doki Doki Panic, and changed the sprites and made it that Super Mario Bros. 2, which is why Super Mario Bros. 2 is so different.
I didn't know that. That's really cool.
Yeah. And then when they went back to 3, they obviously designed the game, at least comparatively, a lot easier than Super Mario Bros. 2 in Japan.
Gotcha. What were some of your like absolute favorite 2D platformers? What are some really iconic ones, or even just your personal favorites?
So of course, the main iconic one is Mario.
Yeah.
Because it's just both a gold standard and still like one of the most fundamentally fun platformer experiences.
Yeah, they're still constantly releasing new titles with the same 2D style of platforming.
Yeah, and even they don't even really need to do that now with Mario Maker. I think is like one of the most perfect. Especially as far as like a make your own content sort of game.
Yeah.
Mario Maker is particularly beautiful because of how the engine they use in that game interacts with each other, and you can do so many cool things just by getting a handle on the physics. And even if you switch physics, because you can switch between the classic Mario World style, Mario 3 style, and the new Super Mario Bros. World, it's so beautiful to see all the how a piece is recontextualized in each different engine. Yeah, that I really like for it. My actual favorite of the classic platformers is I actually really like Sonic a lot.
Okay.
And I like Sonic to some extent more than Mario in a sense. A lot of it is due to particular aesthetic choices I like in Sonic a lot. Like, I really love Sonic's art style and just the really dense but very beautiful pixel art. I like that a lot more than maybe Mario's more consistent sort of look. And I like the Sonic soundtrack a lot. Those are huge contributing factors to why I like those games. But I do like speeding through a game and trying to navigate, because Sonic levels are kind of designed like huge mazes, but it's not a maze in that there's only one way through. The levels usually have like 3 or 4 different tracks. And your punishment for falling off like a fast track is you just have to readjust to a slower route, or maybe a lower route where you're kind of closer to the bottom of the screen and thus death. I always like that a lot more than when Sonic games, like later Sonic games just kind of have, and even later levels in Sonic games have sort of fake difficulty where you're just running forward and then an enemy pops up and you didn't really have a lot of time to expect it. But I think my favorite part of Sonic is when you get into the flow of it and you start to anticipate when you think an enemy will appear and kind of countering that.
Yeah, Sonic's interesting because I remember playing Green Hill Zone for the first time and feeling like my experience on the level was a little different every time because I took a different path every time.
Yeah.
Instead of just like the standard Mario where it is the same path every time. You just have to master taking the path. In Sonic, it was like, oh, I messed up and now I slowed down. Now I have to go through a different pathway and I have to take things slow for a second. So that was definitely like very interesting to me, very unique. Yeah, my favorite platformer, probably like 2D platformer, I'd say is probably the Mega Man series.
Oh, Mega Man's a good one.
Yeah, because Mega Man it's not entirely platformery, I guess, because it has like those elements of unlocking the new weapon and fighting the boss that's with like with your gun, with your weapon, with the different weapons.
Yeah,
you
it's
have.
a very action with the platformer, which was I didn't want this topic to be just platformers, just platforming,
Pure
I guess, in
platformers,
general
yeah.
on game.
Yeah, so Mega Man was like, I loved playing the Mega Man series when I was growing up. I remember it was so cool. My brother would come home and tell me about like the Mega Man X series because I didn't have a system to play the games.
Yeah.
And I would just like look up all of the different boss characters and like really think that they were really cool. And then like when I got a chance, I would play it through a Mega Man game until I think around when like the PlayStation 2 came out, and I picked that up and I picked up a bunch of the old Mega Man games and played through those.
Yeah, they had the collections for them.
Yeah, and then I also played like the 3D Mega Man one, which was
Legends. Yeah.
No, it was the one where Axel showed up. I don't remember what it was called. It had 3D segments, but it would switch between 3D and 2D. Axel was the one who could like turn into Mavericks.
Was that the one with all the Guns N' Roses themed?
Yes, I
I
think.
think that's just a normal X number one.
Was it? Yeah, I think it's X like X13 or something.
I don't think they're that high in Mega Man X.
Was it X9? Maybe. I don't remember.
I'll look it up while.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. But either way, it had like like Ride Borsky was one of the names of the bosses. Flame Hyanard, a bunch of different like weird bosses.
X7, X8, X Command Mission.
Okay, 7 I think it was the one it was. That was like the first 3D one that I picked up, and I liked it when I was a kid, but also looking back, it's definitely not a particularly amazing Mega Man game.
X is not the Mega Man like sub-series I'm familiar with. I've only played X1 Most of my Mega Man experience has been from rediscovering the classics because I never grew up with Mega Man at all. And I got into it around the time Mega Man 9 and 10 came out on WiiWare for the Wii Shop channel, and then it also came out on PS3 and Xbox Live at the same time. And I really loved those games. Yeah. They were really fun, especially for how well they ported the ideas from the old Mega Man games into a modern game, and gave it the quality of life changes of a game in the 2000s compared to a game in the 80s.
Yeah.
But not sacrificing its classicness.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about Mega Man, but also more so Sonic and Mario, is those are those platformers that pushed the envelope into the 3D era. Where those were the big ones that started off as 2D and then became the 3D platforming games. And I remember about the time the N64 came out with the success of Super Mario 64, that was the big boom of 3D platformers, where there was tons of 3D platformers trying to, bank on the success of that genre. And even when I was a kid, I remember thinking oh, I don't really like shooting games. I don't really like, sports games. I just like platformers in these games. And I remember playing almost exclusively platformers when I was younger.
Yeah.
And like I said earlier, games like Bomberman 64 were cool, but then they had Bomberman Hero, which was the platformer version of Bomberman.
Yeah.
And I played the shit out of that game, even though that I don't know if they still do 3D platforming Bomberman games.
I don't believe they
But
do.
I don't think that they really tried to continue that. That was a brief thing. There's Silicon Valley is a weird pseudo-platformer game that was on the N64. There's a bunch of random ones that I can't remember the names of.
That was the time of the big platforming boom. It's very hard to differentiate platformers, or not hard, but when talking about platformers, you kind of have to talk about the mascot era of gaming.
Yeah.
When you had the Marios and Sonic as figureheads, and then a lot of others like Bomberman, having Bomberman in a platformer was their attempt to try to breach into getting that mascot mindshare.
Yeah. Because you have Gex showed up.
Yes.
That's the era, even though it's not a platformer, it makes me think of Buck Bumble. All these weird, they would try to have, the character's got a theme song, because, Buck Bumble had a theme song, and they just tried to have all these mascot characters show up. Ty the Tasmanian Tiger. Spyro was a big one that showed up. I think Spyro's always been 3D, right? I don't think it ever...
Yeah, I don't believe there was...
Yeah, so that one showed up to be 3D.
Crash, of course.
Crash was a big one.
Even before that, I would say... I guess my actual favorite platforming series, that's all straight platforming, is the Donkey Kong series.
Yeah.
And specifically Donkey Kong Country is just my favorite OG platforming series. Mostly because, like I mentioned with Sonic, I love a lot of the aesthetics and stuff with it. And especially the sound design and the graphic design in that game. But the gameplay is so fun because I think it's the perfect in between of Mario and Sonic gameplay. Whereas Sonic is super momentum based. All platformers are momentum based, but Sonic's a lot more speed plus momentum based.
Yeah.
And Mario has momentum, but it's a lot more rigid. You get to the same speed from a running start a lot quicker than you do in Sonic, where you kind of need the large amount of space to gain your speed and maintain it. Donkey Kong was in between, where if you play a Donkey Kong level perfectly, you go through it so fast and it feels like a Sonic game. But you could also play it slowly, methodically, like a Mario.
Yeah.
And Donkey Kong was kind of like Nintendo's attempt to breach, their older mascots into these platforming games, get them in the the mindshare, I guess. And then you would see that idea explode with the N64 era, where you'd have Donkey Kong with its own first party.
And with the PlayStation 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think from Nintendo's offerings, you have not just Nintendo, but Rare is probably the biggest, platformer developer of that era, the N64, PS1 generation.
And that's what's so interesting to me, is that you have something like Donkey Kong, where Donkey Kong started off 2D, hit 3D for the Donkey Kong 64, and then went back to 2D and has stayed there.
Yeah.
And that's, the only series I can think of that, was there before the boom, hit the boom, went 3D for a game, and then went back to 2D and just kept going.
People wish that happened for Sonic.
Yeah, because I know Kirby, I don't think ever went 3D. It always stayed 2D the whole time. Because the Crystal Shards was a 2D game.
Yeah, it was like 2.5D.
Yeah, and so, to be fair, we're talking about movement. We're not talking like visuals. Because obviously tons of 2D platformers...
You could even argue Donkey Kong isn't 2D strictly, and it's a 2.5D game.
Yeah. And another one that did that was Rayman.
Yeah.
Rayman started off 2D. You had the 3D Rayman games that showed up. And then now you're back to 2D Rayman. Although I think Rayman took longer to come back.
Yeah.
With
and I don't remember the last time they released a new Rayman game past Origins, Legends, and... Was there a third one? I feel like there was a third one, but I can't remember.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Spyro has always been a 3D one, but that one kind of... They had their mainline Spyro games, and then they brought it back with the Skylanders series. I know nothing about it.
I just know it's a toy
I just know it's a Transformers style, like, toy-driven thing.
Crash was... So I never played Crash because I mostly grew up in Nintendo, but seeing screenshots since the Insane Trilogy is out, it seemed like it's kind of switches perspectives, and sometimes it's like a 2.5D sideways scrolling game, and then other times it's 3D. It seems a lot more on rails and free than than a Mario or Sonic experience.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like you have 3D movement, but it's very like just one straight line. Yeah. I never played a ton of Crash, but I do know that that was one of those series that like kept going for a while. I remember there was like I don't remember if it was. It might have been called Crash of the Titans. If it was, that's a good name. But if it wasn't, then I just got it wrong.
It's either Crash or Clash. I know which game you're talking about.
Yeah, where you would like ride on giant monsters. It is like it tried all these weird gimmicks to like keep staying relevant when platformers were dying in popularity, and where like the only platformers that could survive were the ones that were like really really popular. Or Nintendo.
I heard actually the reason why Crash went through all those weird turns. This is, I guess, hearsay. I didn't check the legitimacy of this, but people claimed it was because Naughty Dog was losing the Crash license to Activision, and so they wanted to tank the credibility of the license by and the problem was the games they ended up making were still like really good. Like Crash Team Racing was one of the products of this. We're like, if we put this in a kart racer, no one will want to buy it.
And then people loved it. Yeah. It's like Diddy Kong Racing showed up for like one game, but then
Diddy Kong I think is more unique because it tried to be a racing game and like have platformer style progression.
Yeah.
Diddy Kong Racing was a game I never wrapped my head around when I was young, and my cousin had it, but I really enjoyed it when the DS remake came around. Well, for the most part. There were things I didn't like about the DS remake.
Yeah, so obviously like there was the big crash at the end of around when I don't even want to say necessarily when the PS2 and the GameCube came around.
Right after that, because
right after
in the early PS2 GameCube era, GameCube I think still has a lot of platformers when you look at the whole library over time. PS2 definitely had a lot in the front because it had Jack as the main like platformer offerings from Naughty Dog.
Ratchet and Clank Ratchet has platforming elements,
That came around in the same era. Sly Cooper has a bit of a platforming aspect.
Yeah, that was the transition when it first started getting like really, really big to make shooters. And shooters started becoming the really big thing. And when you get to like PS3 and Xbox 360 era, that was like shooters. That's where the money is. And everybody was making a shooting game. Like Halo really jump-started it, I think. And then Call of Duty got massively popular too. And both of those games really just pushed shooters as like the next big boom. And so...
Yeah, at least as far as a market direction kind of thing, absolutely.
Yeah. So there was... And that was kind of like the dead period for a lot of platformers. Where
pretty much only Nintendo was making them at that point.
Yeah, like Sonic was still churning out some stuff.
Sega was still making Sonic games.
Which would usually be multi-platform at that time. They'd be like on
that was
every single system.
When the Dreamcast died and Sega went third party and was releasing everything on anything.
I can't really think of any popular platforming franchises other than Mario and like Donkey Kong Country that were still around during that time.
Even Donkey Kong Country wasn't around at that time. Donkey Kong didn't have its resurgence till the end of the 2000s when Returns came out on the Wii.
Yeah, because I know that Rare had that interesting thing where they were flourishing during the platforming boom. When it was like super popular to make platforming games, they were making amazing platforms that everybody loved. And then Microsoft bought them, which I don't really know what happened with that.
They just offered a lot of money and Nintendo sold them.
Oh, okay, gotcha. And so then when that happened, they kind of kept making games that weren't necessarily as platforming anymore. Like
they had a deal with Nintendo where they could release platformers, or they could release games but not on consoles. They could only release it on the handhelds, which is why you still saw 2 Banjo... I think there were 3 Rareware games made during that time in total. 2 of them Banjo-based. One was Banjo... Kazooie Grunty's Revenge, which was a weird attempt to make a 3D platformer, quote-unquote, on the Game Boy Advance. Which my cousin had that game, and I liked it, but it's very strange. And then Banjo Pilot, which was essentially trying to make Diddy Kong Racing 2, but without the platform elements, and it was just a plain racer game.
Gotcha.
And then there's also It's Mr. Pants on the Game Boy Advance. But yeah, they were stuck making games for Microsoft at the time, and they didn't... Despite the fact that you buy Rare, this company known for amazing platformer and amazing platformer pedigree, and they didn't put them on platformers. The only Rare platformer I can think of that came out in that era was Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, which was not a platformer, really. Yeah. It was a weird sandboxy, create a vehicle and drive it around in a platforming world kind of thing. The game's weird, and it's strange that that's what Microsoft decided to do with Rare.
And I know a lot of people talk about how like the worlds in that universe are so open, like they would be for a platformer, but they just didn't really.
Yeah, because they intend for you to like make a vehicle and traverse it.
So with Rareware, after they got bought out, so it was like after the N64 when they got to like the Xbox, GameCube, PS2 era. I know they made Grabbed by the Ghoulies.
Yep. They made that. They did the Conker's Bad Fur Day.
Yeah, the remake. And that's all I can think of that
Perfect
they did.
Dark
that.
Zero.
Oh yeah, that game everybody hated.
Yeah.
Because they also made Jet Force Gemini and...
Jet Force Gemini
and the original Perfect Dark.
Yep.
Which are both not really platformer games. Those are action games. Then they got to the Xbox 360 and they made Cameo, which was...
I forgot that.
Kind of a platformer. It was like a puzzle exploration game. I had it when I got an Xbox 360, and it was kind of fun. But going back to it, it's just like really shallow gameplay-wise, and kind of weird. It had a lot of weird systems in it, and like a Fox open world where it was like just like a portal area where you go to the different areas to start,
like a hub world overworld.
Yeah, it was like a hub world overworld, but it felt big, so it was weird. What a weird game. And then Viva Pinata.
Yes, that was their main offering during that time.
In which I did enjoy playing those games. But that was like one of those games with the intention of like they made a TV show to go along with it. And then,
it was meant to be a media franchise.
Yeah, it was meant to be a media franchise, and it really didn't take off.
Yeah.
And then you moved on to... After that, they were like, all right, Rareware, you're making Kinect games, and it's just like, I'm Han Solo.
And they weren't free again until Sea of Thieves, pretty much.
Yeah. And now they're working on a new title right now.
Yep, I forget the name of it, but I saw what it was. It looks really cool.
Yeah, it does look interesting. I'm excited to see what Rareware does.
And now you see the old staff from them, go and make Yooka-Laylee in the era of revitalizing the platformer genre.
Yeah.
Mostly in the hands of either Nintendo or indies. Because obviously the indie boom has a lot to do with... like just non-Nintendo people making platformers in general, and revitalizing the classicness of the genre, but bringing it to like a modern standard. Like Shovel Knight, I think, is one of the best examples that Yacht Club Games made of. It's pretty much the best Mega Man game. That's also DuckTales.
Yeah.
And like Shovel Knight, I would love seeing the success story of that game. From what was basically like an indie kickstarted game being such a huge thing that it was like one of the first launch titles on the Switch when it came out, and it had this huge amount of like DLC campaigns going into the original game.
Yeah, because you play as the different characters as well.
Yeah.
Like the Plague Knight and
the
King Knight, and there's one more.
Spectre Knight?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. So I would say that there was like that big gap when shooting games and shooters became like the new big thing where platformers just kind of died.
Yeah, the mid PS2 era into the PS3
360
Wii era.
Wii era, yeah.
No, obviously not Wii because Wii was still making.
Yeah, well, they were playing Mario. I don't really know. They were probably making other like
Mario. Sonic was still coming out at that time, and halfway through the Wii, near the end of it, is when you get Donkey Kong's resurgence. And
and that's what I was gonna say. Is I think. When the return of Donkey Kong and the return of Rayman, I think those are like that's like the beginning of when we started seeing platformers really jumping back in. So you had like Donkey Kong Country's returning, and you had Rayman Origins, And then we had, Shovel Knight, and we're moving into all of these, like, indie platformers being developed and stuff. We had Yooka-Laylee off of just popular demand from people. Them deciding to, like, make... Because that was Kickstarted, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Kickstarter also helped a lot with it. And then you have, moving forward platformers like Cuphead.
Yeah.
And
I would call it more like a run-and-gun type of game than it is a platformer, but it definitely has, like, the mobility of a platformer more so than other run-and-gun games.
Yeah.
Like, I like the... I think they call it a parry mechanic in the game, but the thing that lets you bounce off projectiles and that stuff. Yeah.
If you press a button in the air, or is it always in the air?
It definitely can. Yeah, I think you have.
I think you have to jump into it and then do it. Yeah. So then that's how you really deal with some of the projectiles and make it less likely you get hit by stuff. So we're seeing obviously a huge moving forward. I mean, Indivisible was like a Metroidvania platformer style game that I just played recently that was heavily working on for years and kickstarted it. Mighty Number 9 happened.
We don't talk about that. That was...
But I think Mega Man's kind of coming back now.
I'd say Mega Man... I mean, Mega Man definitely did come back, and now we've seen this sort of slowed momentum. Like, now we have 11 out, so that's better. But before 11, there was just a lull in the Mega Man franchises for a while, which was odd because at the beginning of beginning to midway of the PS3, Xbox 360 generation, you had the resurgence of classic Mega Man with 9 and 10.
Yeah.
And then even other developers like Inti Creates kind of making their own spins on like Mega Man X sort of like types of games. I do think what I would call like the start of the indie platformer like resurgence would be in like 2006, 2007 when Super Meat Boy came out, I think is the big one. And that's more emblematic of a slightly earlier trend in the early 2000s of just indie people making a lot of platformers in general.
Yeah, there were a lot of platformer flash games.
Exactly, and that's where like Meat Boy has its origin in. And even you see the people who made those see their success in the industry now. Like, of course, you have Ed McMillan with Meat Boy. Meat Boy starting out as a Flash game and having, I believe, 2 versions on that. And then releasing Super Meat Boy in, I believe, if I remember right, 2007. And I remember that game exploding in popularity when it came out. Definitely in the Xbox 360 and like PS3 crowds I knew. I remember waiting for it forever to come to Wii, and it never ended up coming to Wii Shop Channel. And the other side of that is around the same time, and because it got featured in Super Meat Boy, was Matt Makes Games' Jumper franchise. And Matt Makes Games is most famous now for being part of the team that made Celeste. And they were making a lot of games beforehand, like the Jumper series with Jumper 1, 2, and 3, which Ogmo from Jumper made it into Super Meat Boy as a playable character.
Yeah.
Run Man, which was another game they had made that got put into Super Meat Boy with Run Man being in. And even the other characters that you see in that game, like they had Captain Viridian from VVV, which is another one of those games in the classic... it's weird to call it a platformer because you don't jump in that game, you just switch gravity. But I think it kind of like plays itself like a platformer Metroidvania type of game.
Well, that was making me think of games like Beautiful Joe, where that's that's like this weird pseudo platformer thing. And then you have who's the creator of Alien Hominid?
Was that Terry Kavanagh?
No, later made Cast Crashers.
Oh, I don't know the name of the developer, but
yeah, that developer has been like moved from Flash games to doing more popular mainstream games. They just released Pit People within the last couple of years, and so there's a lot of original like Flash game developers that are becoming more prevalent, especially because playing games through the internet is becoming a bigger deal. You're purchasing your games through Steam, through online sources instead of going to a game store and buying a physical copy, and that makes it so much easier for distribution of games that can't afford to get factory discs made and send them out.
Yeah, the proliferation of digital storefronts definitely was a catalyst for this whole boom.
And it allowed for, even with just the expansion and popularity with video games, it all kind of just allowed for people to kind of make not low quality, but low budget projects and still meet a niche audience.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been the saving grace of, the platformer in a sense, because of its huge popularity moving forward. And one thing that's like really got like grabbed onto platformers and really absolutely loves them is the speedrunning community.
Yes.
Speedrun, like games like Battle for Bikini Bottom, like these offshoot random platforming games. Yeah, like single release where you just make a platformer because you have a mascot character to throw on it, and then people fall in love with it and just speedrun it, and it has like a popular scene because of that. I mean, we didn't talk about like games like Battletoads, which is like this weird mixture of a beat 'em up game that turns into like a platformer at some points. With,
it's
challenge
like changing
levels.
genres every level, pretty much.
Yeah, and some games like to do that. It's interesting to see like this old style of game where like a lot of people like to see this pixel art, this like visual that reminds them of games that used to exist, instead of like trying to maintain, I guess, like the status quo of what is visually expected of games these days. And it also allows for you to offer games at a significantly lower price, which is very appealing to people.
Yeah. I think another good boon about like platformers is like people like some immersive aspects of like modern action games and like shooters. People like shooters make it feel like, oh, I'm really on like a battlefield type of thing. I like platformers because it almost automatically deals with some amount of escapism, because we aren't people that can jump 5 times our jump height, our height.
Yeah.
So they often tend to leave themselves more fantastical, and I think that it allows for really interesting games to be made based around these mechanics that you can't achieve in reality. And platformers, like we talked about in, or I guess more alluding to our first discussion on movement, platformer, because the game's genre is defined by movement, it allows you to create very interesting games and systems that facilitate really interesting movement, which I think is why speedrunners, attach themselves to the game so much.
Yeah, I mean, the way you move inside of a game is such a defining point of it, where, I mean, like, when we did that, I talked about how going from playing Apex Legends to playing, like, a Halo game is such a weird, like, twist of my mind, because I'm going from a game where, like, Halo Reach just came out for PlayStation. Yeah, the flagship Microsoft series now on PlayStation. No, Halo Reach just came out on Steam, and I have Game Pass, so I just am using that to play it. But it's one of those things where I'm going back to a game where it requires you to pick the loadout that allows you to sprint to have a sprint.
And then, like, it's not just a mechanic.
And I've been playing Apex Legends where it's like you always have a sprint, you like slide down hills and stuff, and it's just so much slower to move. And it's just so strange, like, jerking myself back into that, like, notion, because I used to play Halo a bunch. I used to play a bunch of that game, and so that's very interesting. And, you see elements of platformers thrown into just about everything in modern games.
The Metroidvania, I think, wouldn't really exist as a subgenre without, like, so much of the platformer DNA that it needs.
And then you have games like, even stuff like third-person action games like, God of War or DMC, Devil May Cry, will have, like, elements that show up in them that are kind of platforming at certain points.
Yeah, it's even when the platformer genre had its lull in the early Xbox 360, PS3 generation and the late PS2 Xbox generation, there were still elements of platformers in there because it's just an inherently, like, interesting form of movement. I think one of my favorite games that had an interesting, it was interesting because it had so much platforming, was Metroid Prime. As a first-person shooter, like, action-adventure game, it's weird that you do platforming in it from a first-person perspective, and I think the weirdest part about it is how seamless it feels. Maybe it's just me because I've had years of experience with the game, but I've never had a problem exactly knowing the distance between me and a platform I'm jumping to when I'm in first person, and you would think normally there's, like, it's a lot different when you aren't seeing where your legs are.
Yeah, you only have you don't really have the peripheral that a person has in real life.
Yeah, because even if you, like, focus your view on, like, looking down at the platform, so like, when you're jumping at the edge of it, right, that's still robbing you of the motion of where you need to go.
Yeah.
So that game had, like, an inherent, not necessarily problem, but it definitely had a hurdle to get over as far as making the platforming feel good in that game, and I think they nailed it with every Metroid Prime game. And the later ones didn't have as many platforming areas. Usually they reserve it for just vertical shafts. And a lot of places, the puzzle was how do you get up?
Yeah.
And finding or setting up the platform that would precede you to get more verticality in the map you were in.
The platforming is just kind of getting there, like the puzzle is figuring out how to make it happen.
Yeah, a lot like a normal Metroidvania is, though there it's a lot easier to jump in a normal 2D Metroidvania than a 3D one.
And a game that, when I think about it, at its core is kind of platformery, in a sense, is one of my favorite games, Shadow of the Colossus. Because a lot of that game is literally just like climbing. It's just, jumping and getting up onto different pieces of the Colossus or getting to where the Colossus is and then just getting to where you need to where you can just stab it in its weak spots. And that's like very platformery in that sense.
Yeah, platforming and that game asks you to, think about the space as a puzzle of how do I get to this place.
Yeah.
Where in Shadow of the Colossus it's definitely a lot harder because the puzzle is on a moving creature and you need to navigate that in addition to navigating just the layout of the terrain.
Yeah, and I think a lot of games I really like do have platforming elements. I mean, even like Stranger's Wrath was that game where you would switch between the first and third person, and you'd switch to third person whenever you would do more platformery elements in it that you would use to get around. So a lot of people, I guess to try and remove this almost like tedium and how it can be boring to get to one place to the other, you kind of just add these little puzzles and platforms between like different, primary locations to try and just keep the person entertained.
Yeah, you want to keep the moment-to-moment gameplay interesting, not just the set piece to set piece.
And, there's games that completely avoid that in a sense, with stuff like, I guess the Assassin's Creed series kind of does that, where like it doesn't really... It's just kind of like, here's a big map, go here, go here, go here, go here, go here. A lot of open world games will do that, where like, innately by being open world, they can't really make everything interesting. So you have stuff like the Far Cry series, you have like the Elder Scrolls series, and you have a lot of Rockstar games where, in Red Dead Redemption, going to a place isn't really like all that entertaining unless, you run into some bandits or you make it entertaining by suddenly you're shooting people or something like that.
Yeah.
But part of the immersion is, I guess, like the experience of feeling like you're traveling. It really depends. But like when a game is very controlled, when they're kind of guiding you places, I feel like they're more willing to try to add more elements like that into the game to try and get you to feel involved at every point of playing the game instead of just moving to one place to another.
Yeah. I think another... I feel like a lot of our discussions talked about, a lot of 2D like platforming games, and I think the initial switch from 2D to 3D platformer games, like when it happened, like from going from Mario World to Mario 64, was super fascinating how a bunch of different developers tried to solve the issue of like, what is the goal of a 3D platformer? Because some of them took like, say, the Sonic approach in the Dreamcast era of like Sonic Adventure, where, okay, platformers back then were about get to the end. And Sonic in 3D is, okay, we'll make get to the end, except now we still have a pretty much straight line kind of maze through the level, but now it's just spread out on a different axis. But Mario never really went now the goal is to get to the end of the level, when immediately Mario 64 was, okay, now the levels are big open spaces, and you have to do these tasks to collect things. And
you explore these little worlds.
Yeah, and then you get the start of the sort of like collect-a-thon subgenre of 3D platformers, which dominated the N64 era, and definitely touched the PlayStation era as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, because that's definitely how Bomberman Hero was.
Yeah.
Where it was just like, follow this linear path to get to this place, and like you could look at Battle for Bikini Bottom, where it has the main hub world, and then when you go to a place, generally, I think it kind of stole like the whole thing from Mario, where you could get multiple stars in one place, but it was a pretty linear world a lot of the time. You would just kind of find them as you went along.
Yeah, it's interesting how Mario, after Mario 64, pretty much until Odyssey came out the past few years, each 3D Mario game kind of got a bit more linear in a sense, whereas Mario Sunshine still had, huge wide open spaces were the worlds, but some stars took you into little platformer courses where the goal was just get to the end. There was no other shine sprites to get in there. And then Mario Galaxy, both 1 and 2, both kind of had two sets of different levels, or different types of galaxies, where there was either the big galaxy with a bunch of different tasks to do, and you kind of explored this space and had to realize what was different each mission.
Yeah.
Or they did have the levels that were pretty much just a straight path, and maybe if you went down a right fork this time, you'd get 1 star, and if you went down the left, you'd get another.
Yeah.
It was interesting how they got more linear as time went on, until Odyssey came out and really expanded the open worldness of it pretty much.
Was Odyssey the first Mario game that didn't make you immediately exit the level upon getting a star?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. Because that was always one of the...
Well, except for Mario 64, the 100 coin star didn't take you out.
Yeah.
But every other star did.
Yeah. So that was a welcome change, because it felt like you were exploring the world and finding stuff instead of playing like a mission.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I liked that a lot. Even though you could get stars that weren't in the set mission you were doing in Mario 64, I still liked the fact that you could just keep going and, keep finding stuff.
Yeah, Sunshine had exactly 1 moment where you could get a shine sprite out of order. I guess 2 if you count a glitch to get 1. But yeah, you pretty much had to do the star for the mission you were on. And your only sort of diversion from that was if you wanted to collect... They did have some secret shines in each world, but there were only 2 per world.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see, Mario's pretty much the only 3D platformer modern game I can think of that, tries to keep to the Collecticon thing. Most of the indie platformers are 2D. We did get A Hat in Time.
A Hat in Time is great. And I feel like A Hat in Time, in particular, borrows a lot of its design from, Mario Sunshine specifically, and then also some parts from 64 and other platformers of the era, like Jack and those sorts of things. A Hat in Time was really well done. I need to go back and finish that.
Yeah, because The Hat in Time, Yooka-Laylee, and Odyssey were the 3 collectathon big 3D platformers I could think of that came out within the last several years.
Yeah.
Other than that, I can't really think of any of major ones.
It's interesting how after Yooka-Laylee's first game, the second one that they made is now a 2D platformer, which I heard very good things about.
Yeah, I think that the issue they had with their first game was that they kind of realized that they were making a game that was essentially the same as games they made in the N64. Yeah. And that the game felt dated to people. People had issues with it. And so they were well, all these indie platformers are doing really, really well. Let's make our 2D indie platformer. And so they did.
I feel like they specifically tried to go back to the DNA they had from Donkey Kong Country 1.
Yeah.
Which they made, which I think turned out really well, because I think that game's well done. And it had its own very interesting... Do you know the setup of the second Yooka-Laylee game at all?
No.
The whole game it's called Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair.
Yeah.
And the Impossible Lair is just the one level... It's the first level you have access to in the game. And if you're good enough, you can just beat it. And then you can beat the game right at the beginning. But everything you do in the game kind of helps to make the Impossible Lair easier.
Okay.
Which is an interesting bit of design. It kind of reminds me of... in a weird way, Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass, where the whole game was basically based around one giant dungeon that you kind of tackled in pieces throughout the whole game. And each time you got a new tool, you could access more parts of the dungeon. But ultimately, the goal was to clear that dungeon to beat the game.
What I think is interesting when it comes to the 2D platformer thing and how it had a huge revival is I think there's been one 2D platformer style game that has survived and never strayed away from being a 2D style platformer-ish game. And funny enough, it's Smash.
Yeah.
Because Smash is essentially a 2D platformer fighter.
Yeah, a platform fighter.
And it's always been hugely popular, and it's never needed to switch up from being a two-dimensional platform fighter, even when it came out probably around the time or right when we were getting the 3D boom.
Yeah.
Of platformers, and then when they moved to GameCube, they're well, it's still a fighting game, so we're still going to do this. And we even saw fighting games moving to 3D from 2D, but they were still no, it's 2D. So they kept it the whole time, and even when even Brawl added the adventure mode that was essentially just a 2D platforming adventure mode.
Yeah.
And then did they keep that at all? I think they got rid of it, right?
No, it was not in 4, and it was not in Ultimate.
Yeah, Ultimate was just a challenge mode. Was their
It's
campaign.
basically the event matches.
Yeah. So, but it's kept that up, and it's to the point now where so many people loved the idea of like the platform fighter that we've seen games come out to try and mimic it, whether that be like something like Rivals of the Aether or Brawlhalla, which are like pretty popular and pretty well received, or whether that be something like PlayStation All-Stars, which was just make Smash Bros. For the PlayStation. And, you know, like, it had a niche audience, but it just didn't have the popularity it needed.
Yeah, PlayStation's IP doesn't carry that way like a Nintendo IP does.
Well, the other issue with it was they were missing some really key popular characters,
They were
too.
not getting...
Spyro, Crash.
They didn't get Snake either.
Yeah, Snake.
Because Snake was in Brawl.
Yeah, so it was literally this thing where the flagship characters shown on it were, like, Jack, Daxter, Kratos.
Yeah, Nathan Drake.
Nathan Drake. Those were, like, the big ones. And then they had, like, weird ones where it's, like, Isaac from Dead Space and, you know, Big Daddy. And you're
what
like...
about the best one? Parappa the Rappa.
Yeah, so you were just kind of like, okay, these aren't really PlayStation characters, but fine. Because they didn't really have this big pantheon like Nintendo did.
They kind of do, but like I was saying, their IP doesn't stick in the same way. PlayStation's a lot more experimental with their new games, and they don't... Like, Nintendo commits to one, and they're like, okay, we're going to make this a franchise. And even some were like, okay, we're going to reboot this and try to make it a franchise, like with Kid Icarus. Sony likes to just release some experimental games, like Parappa the Rappa, Guitar Man, stuff like that, and they just sort of let them sit out there. I forget, did they have the Ape Escape protagonist in PlayStation also? Okay. That would have been a big omission if they didn't have...
Yeah, they had the Ape Escape protagonist, I remember that. And then there's, like, Fat Princess was one of them.
Yeah, they had the Gravity Rush girl, too.
Yeah, that was a DLC character.
Yeah.
Yeah, the DLC characters were, like, the Gravity Rush girl, the dude from Starhawks, I think it was called.
I don't know what that is.
It was a game. It was, like, a PlayStation exclusive online-only game or something.
Zeus was a DLC, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
When they're like, let's have another God of War.
Yeah.
Let's have an interchangeable character who could be in literally anything and you'd be recognizing him.
Yeah.
But it was also like, I wouldn't even blame it necessarily exclusively on the lack of, you know, popular characters. It was also a very weird game.
They specifically tried to make the game not Smash-like in how it played, and I think that was hugely to its detriment more so than anything.
Yeah, I did look into its development a little bit and how, like, the game didn't even really start off being a Smash-like game. It started off kind of being, like, a platforming adventure game where you could play as any of the PlayStation characters, and then they were, like, trying to change it, and it went through a bunch of different stuff, but... Anyways...
You saying this actually reminds me of a So, in the big resurgence of platformers... One I forgot to mention was Little Big Planet.
Oh, yeah.
Was a real...
How did we forget Little Big Planet? That was so big. That was like the original Mario Maker.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, it was the original mainstream game about, like, you know, building the platforming map and then going along it. And that was super huge for a while.
And huge into user creation stuff, too. And people were making really interesting things with that. I was never a fan, like a huge fan of Little Big Planet, and that's only in... its mechanics as a platformer. Mm-hmm. It's weird that a platformer like that felt so heavy.
It really did.
The jumping on it was very... Like, that was a huge deterrent for me playing it, at least. I've played through at least 1 through 3, and not... they had, like, a card spin-off or something that I didn't play.
Probably.
And the games are fine. I like the level design in it a lot, and the tool... I love how the game's mechanics, or the game's levels, are just made by... These are the tools we allow you to use in your level creator, so we'll use only those tools to make the game.
Yeah. I like when games do that. I think it was the Neverwinter Nights series kind of did that, where before it became an MMO, because I think it's an MMO now, that I used to have so much fun just building scenarios in the Neverwinter Nights scenario creator, and you could share those online. And I would just, like, make these worlds with these encounters and all this kind of stuff. And it was a ton of fun to do that. And I really like when they give you all the tools, like StarCraft's map editor will do that, too. It tends to be, like, a big thing with, like, top-down, or, like, RPG and strategy games where they can do the map editor thing. But it's perfect for, you know, platformers. And even Smash dipped into it. A lot better this time.
Yeah.
A lot better than the Brawl one was. Did they even have one in Smash 4?
I think they did later on, but it definitely didn't start with one.
Yeah.
I guess I'll fact check that right now because I think it was added. It's also possible they skipped it because it was
abysmal the first time they tried it.
Yeah, I'm still not that big a fan of like custom stages.
I just think they did a better job this time.
They for sure did. I wish it was slightly more robust, but it definitely felt more like half Mario Maker inspired.
Yeah,
if they went full on into the Mario Maker, I would love that a lot more.
Well, and it's funny when like when the companies like realize, holy shit, we can add longevity to our game by just letting the community make the DLC.
It does have customs. Yeah, there was a stage builder.
Okay. Yeah, I never owned a Wii U, so I don't know. Like
I owned a Wii U and I didn't own that Smash.
Yeah, I had Brawl and I have
I played on the 3DS. The 3DS version, I believe, definitely didn't have an editor.
Well, hopefully, and that's the other thing is hopefully seeing the popularity of Banjo-Kazooie inside of Smash that will kind of like rekindle the ability of them to try and make something else with that. But
that's the hope. But seeing that new Rareware game means that
it wouldn't be Rareware that made it.
It either wouldn't be Rareware that made it or it wouldn't be soon.
Yeah,
because that game's probably going to come out end of next year or early the year after that, I feel.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how platforming as a genre is pretty much synonymous with my childhood.
Yeah.
Like, it's weird to look at my past and think historically, like, okay, very small kid, Pokemon, and then like a couple other random, Game Boy games. Childhood, platformers. And then I move into like teenage years and high school, shooters.
For me, it was a lot longer because I only had a Wii as my only console, so I just had platformers all the time from pretty much the same thing as you. Start with Pokemon, then I went into like Sonic Adventure DX, and then from there, like I was pretty much mostly platformers, and the only shooter really was like Metroid Prime series, which was still platformer.
Yeah.
And like Metroidvania, so like up until the last generation, pretty much, I was like still all platformers because there was still like the Mario Galaxies coming out, Donkey Kong Country Returns, Nintendo's offerings were mostly platformers, and I ate that up.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember also like strategy games and RPGs being relevant when I was like not super young, but as I got a little bit older, I played more of those. Like, I mean, technically with the N64, I played Quest 64, but then we got to like PS2, I played some Final Fantasy stuff and like portable stuff. I would play like Advanced Wars, and then I also loved Age of Mythology, Age of Empires, and StarCraft, and then finally StarCraft 2 came out and Dawn of War 2 came out. So like that was kind of like high school era. I guess like probably the point where it was like dead for me was like when I was in like middle school time. Where, like, in elementary school, I would play Age of Mythology and Age of Empires and stuff, and then nothing new came out for a long time for RTSs. They kind of died for a while, and then after that, we got to me being like, oh shit, StarCraft 2, oh shit, Dawn of War 2, like, all that kind of stuff, so.
So I was going to ask you a question of, what would be your favorite 2D platforming series, if you were to name one or a few games that you...
I already said Mega Man, didn't I?
Which Mega Man?
Oh, fuck. I've played so many of them, they're blending together.
Yeah. My answer, like my favorite Mega Man game, I would say is probably 3.
I was gonna say 2.
2 is the most common answer.
Yeah.
I think 2 is really good. I like 3 because it has like double the levels from 2.
I also have fond memories of like the first ever phone game that I got was like Mega Man 2 on my phone.
Oh, nice.
And I was just like, oh yeah, I would drain the shit out of my battery. And just be like, because I would be waiting at like the doctor's office and I'm like playing Mega Man 2 like, oh hell yeah.
Some of the first games when I got emulators in high school were definitely Mega Man 1 and 2.
Yeah, I didn't even get a cell phone, I think, till I got to high school pretty much. So that was about the time, and it was still a flip phone that I was playing that on.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit awkward, but to think of if that's talking 2D.
I was also going to ask you later for 3D as well.
Yeah, so like for 2D platformer, that's probably it. Like the Mega Man series.
Yeah.
I also love Kirby. Like it's hard for me to say that. It's hard for me to not say that like Dreamland 2 being the first game I ever played is like really important to me as a game. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
I need to go back and play it. I haven't played it in such a long time. But I guess when it comes to 3D platformers,
Yeah.
probably the one that sticks in my mind the most is Donkey Kong 64. I played that game so much when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Because I actually never owned Super Mario 64.
I never did either. I borrowed it from a neighbor for a long time, and then I never played it again until the DS version came out.
Yeah, I did play the DS version, but I mostly played it at my cousin's house. So, for me, the big one was I had Donkey Kong 64, and then I also had Bomberman Hero. And those are like the big platformers that I have a lot of like nostalgia for. And if we're talking about like new stuff to have come out like really recently, it's hard because I've really been like lacking in playing a lot of the new indie platformer titles. I haven't really touched a lot of them. I still have to play Ori and the Blind Forest. I still have to play Hollow Knight. I've actually never played Shovel Knight.
Oh, Shovel Knight.
So that's one of the ones I also still really need to play. And, Cuphead's been a lot of fun, but again, you said that's more of a run and gun than a platformer. And then with 3D, I mean, there's not a big choice for recent 3D platforming titles.
There's basically just Mario Odyssey, Hat in Time, and Yooka-Laylee.
And I haven't played Hat in Time or Yooka-Laylee, so Odyssey.
I really like Odyssey. Like, I feel like I obviously have a lot of nostalgia for the N64 era of platformers. Like, Donkey Kong 64 is the game I probably played the most as a kid. A lot of it you can thank Grant Kirkhope for that, because his compositions in that and the Banjo-Kazooie games and Banjo-Tooie, those were why I kept coming back to those games.
Yeah.
And exploring those worlds I thought very fun. I know a lot of people like the shit on Donkey Kong 64 because of just how it's the logical extreme of the collect-a-thon like N64 era with how much there's to collect. I enjoyed doing it. A lot of, like, it's probably all nostalgia-based, but I just love that world a lot. I don't know.
I think about last year I went back and I 100%ed Donkey Kong 64.
I did that too when it came out on Wii U Virtual Console.
Oh, I just did it on an N64.
Yeah.
Because I just did that and I enjoyed it. I had fun doing it. So, I mean, like, there were a lot of moments of tedium and, like, certain things like, God,
Beaver Bother.
Beaver Bother's the worst. But, like, I still don't like having to play through that one 2D astronaut game.
Oh, Jetpack?
Jetpack? Yeah, I still hate having to play through Jetpack to get to that certain point in the game. Donkey Kong was way easier. Like, so when I was a kid, I sucked at the Donkey... I was awful at Donkey Kong.
Yeah.
So I struggled really hard at that. That was a breeze for me this time around. Jetpack was a pain in my ass.
You need to play so much of Jetpack, though, because you only get so small an amount of points from it.
Yeah.
Because I believe you need to get 5,000 to get the Rare Ware coin.
Yeah.
And I think you get points in 10-point increments. Unless you get all the diamonds in a level, which is probably the easiest way to...
Yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah.
So, I have memories of my brother and I never beating the game because, again, the Jetpack and the Donkey Kong.
The only reason why I ever knew the ending of that game was because, obviously, we got, like... I got pretty much all of my games secondhand at that point in my life, and the cartridge of Donkey Kong 64 I had a second save file with, like, 100% on it. So whenever I wanted to just do the final boss, I would just boot up that cartridge and go straight to the final boss.
Yeah, but oh god, back to the days of renting N64 games from Blockbuster and seeing people who had like 100% of the game. Like Bomberman 64 was like that for me, where I never beat Bomberman 64 by myself. But then like there'd be secret levels that I didn't know existed, and it's like they got there with Bomberman 64. I'm like, how did they get there? How did they do?
Yeah.
And it would be like this amazing thing to me.
I feel, and also talking about Mario, I feel like Mario Odyssey is such like a masterclass game where, like, still playing that game, like, I beat that game in a week just because it was so fun. I never wanted to put it down, and I wanted to collect every single moon in that game.
Yeah.
And the worlds were just really cool to explore. I know a lot of people are like find the game kind of not. I guess maybe not a lot of people. It might be a vocal minority of people who like find the game kind of shallow or like otherwise lacking compared to the other ones. I think they just have nostalgia goggles on because Mario Odyssey is like so good. The movement in it is a lot of what makes it so fresh. And that's also a thing that Hat in Time nails is the movement in Hat in Time and how you can link your actions together. Just like in Mario Odyssey, it's the same thing where you have a huge amount of ways to link your moves together to traverse a bunch of different spaces. Makes it really fun. And then as far as my favorite 2D platformer, as much as 2D platformers are like an era rooted mostly in the past, all my favorite entries are recent games with Celeste, I think, being the best example of the hard indie platformer kind of like subgenre, like the Super Meat Boys kind of games.
Yeah, I've been watching a couple of people stream that game and having a good time seeing people play it.
Yeah, I really want to get into speedrunning it because just the game looks so impressive to be speedrun. I'm not sure if you've seen a speedrun of the game.
I've seen people like efficiently go through levels really fast. I haven't seen it like a percentage speedrun, but I definitely understand how that can like super impressive to be speedrun.
Yeah, and then my favorite game on the Switch right now, and probably my favorite game of the past generation, and I think is personally the best platformer of all time, is Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. Because that game is such a masterclass in design.
I heard some really good stuff about that one.
It's weird how the Return series is honestly it's a lot different from the old Donkey Kong Countries, where they're kind of slower, more methodical games. These ones have long, complex levels, but they're all like so perfectly executed. Even though the levels can look kind of daunting, they all have like a built-in speedrunner's kind of like fast path, where if you just play super optimally, you can just speed through a level. And it does my favorite thing in platformers, which was another thing I wanted to ask you of your favorite things to see in platformers. My favorite thing that this game does is how good the world looks. As far as like how the world's built for platformers, like something I loved in the original Donkey Kong Country Returns is, platformers, we expect there to be platforms suspended in midair and kind of illogically, like why are these platforms just floating in the air over chasms? Yeah. And there was a lot of detail put into Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze to kind of show why every platform is exactly where it is. They're either suspended by chains if it's like a mining complex built into the side of a canyon, or if it's a tree, and a tree trunk is just in the foreground where you play. Yeah. You still see the rest of the tree in the background, and it looks so seamless as to why, all these pieces are there. I just love those sorts of touches. A lot of Donkey Kong Country Returns levels have components where the levels usually start crumbling away behind you. Yeah. Usually if it's like a time challenge or something. And it's really fun to see how everything breaks and how much of that information is conveyed to you just through the game.
Yeah, I was thinking about how when I was playing through Indivisible, a lot of the platforms in Indivisible they went out of their way to make sure that they were visually part of the background. They weren't just a floating platform that existed for no reason. Yeah. A lot of them were platforms that existed for no reason, but they didn't float for no reason.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk about the greatest platform ever created? Why don't we talk about Bubsy?
I don't know. I thought you were going to say Gex, but
it's tail time. But yeah, so elements I really like to see in platformers, I guess, is I like the worlds to be alive.
Yeah.
I don't like these empty, like, I guess, it would be like these empty little courses that you just go through where there's nothing there, it's just platforms. I like the world to, like, be alive and flourishing, to have characters that might talk to you, or, like, enemies moving around and everything. So I like to see a very inventive and interesting world. And I like to see stuff, develop over time, and that was a cool thing. If you ever, there's the game Hob, and Hob, the world, like, builds around you almost. Yeah. Like, you unlock, like, areas where the entire world will just, like, rise up, because it's like a big clockwork world. And so, seeing how the map changed over time, and as you destroyed these, like, infecting pods that would, like, fill areas with the infection and make them unpassable, it was cool to see. I like seeing a world change over time.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool. And that's something that was cool to see with Mario 64 in a way, where you would go and, like, the ship is sunk. And then, the ship's up floating now. Yeah. Different, like, changes, different times you play the map.
Or, like, when Bowser's sub disappears.
Yeah.
Or
all of that stuff.
How the eel moves from the ship to a cove in the side of Jolly Roger Bay.
Yeah, and you can try to bait it out to get the star off of its tail. So, I like to see that a lot. So, name a game or two that you're gonna get to soon in the future to play platform-wise. I mean, both of us Hollow Knight.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like a Metroidvania is probably going to be all the examples I can think of, like Hollow Knight. I'm trying to think of another platformer. I mean, I still need to finish Celeste Chapter 9 DLC. I'm literally on the last screen of it. It's just really hard.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to revisit some, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Probably play through Mario World again. Super Mario Maker 2, because they just released or announced a content patch for it.
Yeah.
With a lot of new tools and playing as Link in the levels. It's going to be really fun. I need to actually because I did a dive into that game when it came out, and I beat through the story mode, tried playing some levels, tried making some levels. I really need to sit down and do that because that game is just so good.
Yeah, I'm working on trying to get an Elgato so that I can stream like N64 games and like older games because I kind of want to do like almost like a stream schedule of like nostalgic games. Call it like, maybe even just like a video series. Call it a Fever Dreams of just all these games I vaguely remember that I just play back through and see how they hold up based upon my nostalgia and everything. Like not Super, Bomberman 64.
Super Bomberman 64.
God, it was like, there's a Might and Magic game called Shifters I want to play through again that's for like the PS2. It's got those like really cheesy, like really janky looking 3D model cutscenes, and there's just a bunch of them I want to kind of re-explore. I kind of want to replay through the Crash of the Titans game too, because I remember really enjoying that, despite like people saying it was kind of bad.
That's not like one in the Insane trilogy or anything, is it? Or
I don't think so. I don't know.
I'm not very familiar with Crash games, so I don't know.
Either way.
Oh, one I do want to play, because I've never actually played through all of them, is the Jak and Daxter games.
Oh, yeah. I've actually never played a Jak and Daxter game.
I've only played a bit of one. That's it.
I played all of the Ratchet and Clank games. I loved those games, but I did not play Jak and Daxter.
The extent that I play Ratchet and Clank is like back when GameStops had demo kiosks. I would play whichever Ratchet and Clank was out for the PS3 at the time. So it's either... Actually, I'm not even going to attempt to name them because I don't know the Ratchet and Clank super well.
I just have really good memories of those games, but Jak and Daxter, I had a friend who absolutely loved them, and that was super...
Oh yeah, I remember one of the most vibrant memories for me of like elementary school is my friend coming in with his like big player's guide of Jak and Daxter and just looking through it with him, and I didn't understand, especially not at the time because I never played the game then, what I was looking at, but I thought it was so cool just reading through that strategy guide.
I can't believe I almost forgot Psychonauts.
Oh, yeah.
I loved Psychonauts. That was a great platforming game. I've played through it. I've beaten it probably like at least 3 times. And that's a game that I'm excited to see the sequel that they're making right now. I'm excited to see what they do with it. I hope it turns out to be really good. And that one came out kind of like at the end of platforming's like big boom.
That was like 2001 game, I believe.
Yeah, I mean,
because it was on the original Xbox. Right?
Yeah, it was on the original Xbox. Yeah, so it's older than I'm thinking it is, but it's still one of those games. I can't believe I brought that up because that's one of my favorite platformers of all time. I love that game.
Yeah, one I forgot to mention as a Wii platformer that wasn't a Nintendo game or a Sonic game, Klonoa is really fun, and not a lot of people know Klonoa.
I have no idea what that is.
It's a Namco Bandai, well, they were probably just Namco at the time, I believe. Mascot platformer starring like a cartoon. I forget if he's meant to be a dog or a rabbit, because I know he has ears that kind of make him fly.
Mm-hmm.
It was a 2.5D side-scroller that I remember was recommended because I was probably reading Nintendo Power at the time, and they gave it like an 8.5 or something, and I'm like, okay, I'll play this platformer. It was definitely in the pre-platformer boom from with Donkey Kong Country Returns, as far as like huge platforming franchises coming from Nintendo game. Again, I even remember when all the hype around New Super Mario Bros., the original one on the DS, which, New Super Mario Bros. Is obviously leading to a franchise now on the Wii U, 3DS, all that stuff. But I remember there was so much hype going into that game of Nintendo finally making another 2D Mario, like with their principal dev team and everything. And I remember that game was so well loved, and then by the time they made like 2 more of those New Super Mario games, people were very sour on them, even though they were all like still really good platformers.
I guess my introduction, now that I think about it, to the indie platformer style of game actually was probably with Spelunky. When Spelunky came out, I loved that game. I played it so much. And I don't even know if it was when it came out. I think it was like back in 2012, maybe 2013.
Oh, I think the game's a lot older than that.
Yeah, but I played the crap out of it on like my Xbox 360, and I love that game. I own it on PC now, and I still have it downloaded. Like, that's one of my favorite, just kind of like sit down and play it for like 15 minutes, go for a run, kind of like games. And that's a really cool one, so
Oh,
I
yeah.
just wanted to mention it.
You saying that made me think of another one, more Metroidvania than just straight platformer, but one of the most important games to me, Cave Story, has a lot of really good platformer, because it's mostly a pretty straightforward Metroidvania, mostly just platform and gun action game.
Yeah.
That's just really well done, and if people somehow haven't played it, they should play it, because it's on like almost everything now, and it's so good.
I remember when they rebooted Bionic Commando.
Oh, yes.
That was such a out of nowhere kind of like...
Didn't they do... It had a similar thing to Metroid, I think, where 2 new Bionic Commando games came out around the same time. Because it was Rearmed, which was the remake of the first one.
Yes, and then they made a new one.
Yeah, the new one.
They made My Wife Is My Arm.
That was the Edgy Spencer design that they use in...
Marvel vs. Capcom 3.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, the My Wife Is My Arm Spencer. And so, yeah, I mean...
Was that... Because that one was like a 3D... Because
it was like a grapple game. Like you do.
Was that a platformer? I don't know anything of it.
I think so. I vaguely remember it. I think it was, but the original one was. Either way, Hollow Knight and Shovel Knight and Every Knight. I need to play those games.
Yes.
Those are the big ones that I'm trying to think of that I need to play. And you said Hollow Knight, and then.
Hollow Knight, definitely. I need to finish Hat in Time, so I should probably do that.
And also Celeste. So.
Yep, need to finish Celeste.
I need to play Celeste.
You do. Celeste is really good.
Yeah, so a lot of good platformers out there, and we're kind of hitting a big wave of just good new stuff. So it's excited to talk about. And
I'd still probably say platformer is probably my favorite genre, or at least if I want to default to a genre I love a lot, then I'd probably more so go platformer than JRPG personally, despite how many of those I play. I just love me a good platformer.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that we can kick it off there. So thank you for having this discussion, Ollie.
Yes, thank you.
I really enjoyed it, and you definitely had a lot to say on this topic, so that's definitely really good.
I love me my platformers.
Yeah, I enjoy myself a platform. It's just been a while since I've rekindled my love, so...
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Check us out on Twitter and on Twitch and on all sorts of social media stuff, and we will see you next week. So have a wonderful, wonderful week.
See ya.